Part 1. The King of Spain. In late 1697, the 9 Years' War ended in Europe, waged by France's powerful king Louis XIV. As the final signatures were written onto the Treaty of Ryswick, Europe began to look at Spain. Despite its immense wealth and global reach, Spain was poorly managed and overextended. Much like the empire, its king, Charles II of the Habsburg dynasty, was also weak and frail. Because of this, he was childless, creating uncertainty about who would inherit his empire. This crisis began in 1659, when France and Spain ended their long conflict with the Treaty of the Pyrenees. As part of the deal, a younger Louis XIV married Maria Theresa, the daughter of Spain's King Philip IV. Maria Theresa renounced her claim to Spain's throne, but Spain failed to pay the dowry promised in the treaty. This gave Louis XIV a reason to challenge the agreement later. In 1661, Philip IV had a son, Charles, who was weak and sickly from birth. When Philip died in 1665, Charles became king at just 4 years old. Louis XIV used Spain's unpaid dowry as a pretext to invade the Spanish Netherlands, modern-day Belgium. Meanwhile, Louis and Holy Roman Emperor Leopold I, also a Habsburg, secretly planned to divide Spain's empire if Charles II died without an heir. As time went on, Charles II surprised everyone by living longer than expected. But his poor health and lack of children caused problems in Europe. By 1698, 2 men were competing to take over his throne. The first was the Dauphin, son and heir of Louis XIV. He claimed the Spanish crowns through his mother, Maria Theresa, as Spanish inheritance law allowed him to. The second was Archduke Charles, son of Leopold I and great-grandson of Spain's King Philip III. If either of them got all of Spain's empire, their families, the Bourbons or the Habsburgs, would become too strong and too powerful for other European countries. England and the Dutch Republic were especially worried about this balance of power. The Dutch wanted the Spanish Netherlands as a shield against France. Under the Treaty of Ryswick, they were allowed to station troops in 8 Spanish fortresses and towns in the region. Both England and the Dutch relied on Spain staying weak and divided. They liked trading with Spanish colonies illegally and wanted to keep their own power in Europe safe. As Charles II's health worsened, King William III of England and the Dutch worked with Louis XIV to divide Spain's vast empire. In October 1698, they signed the first Partition treaty, leaving Spain out of the talks. The deal gave Naples, Sicily, and parts of northern Spain to the Dauphin, while Archduke Charles would get Milan. The rest of the Spanish Empire would go to a third party, the young Joseph Ferdinand of Bavaria, maintaining the balance of power in Europe. However, many in Spain disagreed, and Charles II made a will granting Joseph Ferdinand the entire Spanish Empire. But Joseph Ferdinand died unexpectedly in 1699, and the treaty fell apart. William and Louis created a second partition treaty, giving Spain and its colonies to Archduke Charles, southern Italy to France, and Milan to Austria, provided Austria gave Lorraine to France. France would then give its new Italian territories to its ally, Savoy, in exchange for some land in the Alps. Once again excluded, a dying Charles II made a new will out of spite. He left the entire Spanish Empire to Philip, the Duke of Anjou, the grandson of Louis XIV. Spain's court supported this choice, since Philip was unlikely to inherit the French crown anytime soon, avoiding an immediate union of the two powers. Charles II died on November 1st, 1700, 5 days before his 39th birthday. News of Charles's death reached Louis on the morning of November 8th. He then faced a tough choice. The Second Partition Treaty had promised Spain to Archduke Charles, but Leopold refused to sign because it divided the Spanish Empire. If Louis honored the treaty, he would have to fight both Austria and Spain. But if he accepted Charles's will, he would gain Spain as an ally against Austria. On November 12th, Louis told Madrid he would honor Charles's will. On the 16th, he declared his grandson as King Philip V of Spain in a grand ceremony at Versailles. By December 1700, many European leaders, including Elector Maximilian Emanuel of Bavaria, the father of the late Joseph Ferdinand, Savoy, Poland, and several German states, supported Philip as king. Louis's ambassador in London, the Count of Tallard, believed William III would do the same. However, Louis grew overconfident. In February 1701, he sent French troops to take the Dutch forts in the Spanish Netherlands. These forts surrendered without resistance, following orders from Max Emanuel, who was also the Governor-General of the Spanish Netherlands. Their secret plan included replacing Leopold with Max Emanuel as Holy Roman Emperor if France went to war with Austria. For William III, this takeover undid 20 years of work. Louis worsened relations by supporting James Edward Stuart, the exiled son of James II, as England's heir to the aging William. This angered the English government, who saw it as a threat to their Protestant rule. In response, Parliament strengthened England's army and navy, preparing for war. In September, England, the Netherlands, and Austria formed the Grand Alliance to oppose France and Spain. France and Spain found allies in Savoy and Portugal. Max Emanuel in Bavaria began raising troops with French help, but stayed neutral. His younger brother, Joseph Clemens, the Archbishop of Cologne, also supported France. Meanwhile, Leopold sought out allies for the Grand Alliance. In Germany, Hanover and the Hessian states joined the alliance. Frederick, the Elector of Brandenburg, offered help, but only if he was made king. Leopold agreed, and Frederick sent 8,000 troops. In March, William III died in a riding accident, and his sister-in-law, Queen Anne, became queen. The Dutch, however, were left without their stadtholder. Many in France hoped Anne would change England's policies, but she was steadfast in continuing what William had started. Anne's husband, Prince George of Denmark, also strengthened the Grand Alliance by bringing small elements of Danish support, Meanwhile, French ambassadors tried to convince the Dutch to leave the Grand Alliance, promising separate peace with France. But John Churchill, the Earl of Marlborough, and top diplomat, arrived just in time to assure the Dutch of England's support. Despite France's efforts to break the alliance, the Grand Alliance stayed strong and united. On May 15, 1702, the War of the Spanish Succession officially began, but fighting had already been happening in northern Italy for over a year. To protect Milan, Leopold sent Prince Eugene of Savoy of 30,000 soldiers in early 1701. Duke Victor Amadeus II of Savoy allowed French troops, led by Marshal Nicolas Catinat, to pass through the Alps to take over Milan. By April, the French had captured Mantua, giving control over the area from the Alps to the Po River. In late May, Prince Eugene advanced and needed to cross the Adige River to get supplies. The French controlled the river's key crossings, and both armies spent weeks trying to outmaneuver each other. On June 27th, Eugene surprised the French near Verona, making Catinat unsure of his next move. On the foggy morning of July 9th, Eugene's cavalry clashed with the French. Despite reinforcements, the French were forced to retreat. Eugene's forces killed 550 French soldiers, while suffering only 40 casualties, including himself, who was grazed by bullets but continued to lead. Catinat lost his command and was replaced by the Duke of Valois, a favorite of Louis. By September, the French were pushed back behind the Oglio River. Eugene built a strong defensive position near Chiari, surrounded by canals and flooded fields. On September 1st, 8,000 French troops under Valois launched 12 attacks, but the Imperialists held strong. Again, the French retreated, leaving nearly 3,000 dead or captured, while Eugene's army had only 117 casualties. After the two armies took a break for winter, Eugene began a new campaign in January 1702 with 21,000 men, compared to over 75,000 French and Spanish troops. In February, secretly entered the French-held city of Cremona through its sewers and captured it. Though the French fought back, the surprise attack weakened them, and during the fighting, Valois was captured, though he was soon released. Eugene's efforts had shifted the balance of power in Italy, and Louis replaced Valois with the skilled Duke of Vendôme to fix it. Part 2. New Fronts, New Allies. Before the war, English and Dutch trade fleets, called Smyrna convoys, carried goods between Europe and the Middle East, benefiting from the lucrative Levant trade. However, France and Spain took control of these trade routes and blocked others from using the Mediterranean. To regain control, the Allies aimed to capture the important Spanish port of Cadiz. In August 1702, Admiral George Rooke led a large Anglo-Dutch fleet with 14,000 troops to Cadiz. After delays, they landed near the port, but disorder among the troops and looting upset the local people, who resisted the invaders. Poor planning and strong Spanish defenses forced the Allies to give up the attack by late September. Soon after, the Allies discovered that the annual Spanish treasure fleet was hiding in Vigo Bay, protected by French and Spanish ships in northwestern Spain. On October 22nd, Rooke led a successful attack, destroying most of the fleet. While much of the treasure had already been moved to safety, the Allies seized £1 million worth of loot, boosting morale after the failure of Cadiz and greatly weakening France's navy. This victory encouraged Portugal's King Peter II to switch sides and join the Grand Alliance. England's diplomat to Portugal, John Methuen, offered Portugal rewards like territorial gains and military support. In May 1703, Portugal signed a treaty with England, Austria, and the Dutch, pledging to support Archduke Charles, now proclaimed as King Charles III, with thousands of troops and naval support. This alliance opened a new path to attack Spain, giving the Allies a better chance to win the war. Meanwhile, in Italy, Prince Eugene was laying siege to Mantua, but Vendôme aimed to stop him. Vendôme planned to draw and trap Eugene near the Oglio River and block Eugene's supplies. Eugene asked Austria for reinforcements, but they did not come. If Vendôme attacked, the imperial army would surely be crushed. In July, Vendôme defeated an imperial vanguard force at Santa Vittoria and forced them to retreat. On August 15th, Vendôme moved towards Luzzara, expecting little resistance. Despite being outnumbered with only 20,000 men, Eugene met him and launched a surprise attack, causing chaos in the French ranks. However, a second wave arrived too late to secure a victory. The battle ended in a draw as night fell, with heavy losses on both sides. Vendôme captured Luzzara's castle a few days later, but Eugene had stopped the French advance and claimed a partial victory. The campaign continued through September, seeing both sides engage in minor skirmishes. Disease and supply shortages weakened Eugene's forces, forcing him to retreat to his winter quarters. Vendôme also withdrew in November, destroying infrastructure as he left. The campaign ended without a clear winner, and Eugene returned to Austria to plan for the future. Towards the north, Louis-François de Boufflers was to lead a French offensive in the Low Countries to weaken the Grand Alliance and threaten the Netherlands' southern border before English and Dutch forces could unite. In June, he advanced to Cadiz to challenge the Dutch, but got distracted by defending Camisards and a Dutch raid in Flanders. This forced him to spread his troops thin. On June 30th, the Earl of Marlborough took command of a 60,000-strong Anglo-Dutch army, despite Dutch doubts of his ability. Marlborough began moving southwest on July 26th, aiming to cut Boufflers' supply lines. This forced the French away from the Rhine River, but the Dutch, cautious about risking a major battle, limited Marlborough's options. Defeating France in battle was less urgent for the Dutch, as they feared a loss would leave their republic exposed. Instead of big battles, Marlborough focused on sieges. The Anglo-Dutch army captured Venlo in September, Roermond in October, and Liège by October 24th, despite French resistance. Boufflers retreated to his winter quarters, and for his efforts, the Earl of Marlborough was made a duke by Queen Anne. Starting a new campaign in 1703, Marlborough targeted Antwerp and Ostend, two important ports in the Spanish Netherlands, but faced setbacks due to Dutch mistakes. At the Battle of Akron in June, Boufflers ambushed a smaller Dutch force of 15,000, killing or wounding 4,000 men. "Never was a sharper combat seen," observed a French officer. Knowing Antwerp could not be taken easily, Marlborough shifted focus to the Meuse River, capturing Huy in August and Limburg in September. These victories secured the Dutch Republic and strengthened Allied control in the region. While Marlborough succeeded along the Meuse, the French made up for the losses elsewhere. In 1702, Louis William, the Margrave of Baden, captured Landau on the left bank of the Rhine in September. Soon after, Bavaria joined the Bourbons, and Max Emanuel took Ulm. This made Louis William retreat to defend Baden. Louis XIV sent his skilled marshal, Claude Louis Hector, the Duke of Villars, with 17,000 troops to help Max Emanuel. On October 14th, Villars defeated Louis William at Friedlingen, clearing the way to the Danube. In May 1703, Villars captured Kehl and joined the Bavarians. Villars wanted to march to the Austrian capital, Vienna, but he found himself suddenly under the command of Max Emanuel, whose defeat at Amberg ruined the plan. Max Emanuel then aimed to march to Tyrol and link up with Vendôme, but the campaign faltered. This failure caused Duke Victor Amadeus II, fed up with French pressure and demands, to switch sides to the Grand Alliance in November. But French forces quickly cornered the Duke and occupied much of his land. Meanwhile, Louis William's victory at Landau was reversed. In August, French forces under the Duke of Burgundy, a grandson of the Sun King, and Count Tallard besieged Breisach. In October, Tallard besieged Landau, defeating an imperial relief force at Speyerbach on November 15th. Landau fell 2 days later. While Breisach was being bombarded, Villars and Max Emanuel reunited near the Danube, but argued over strategy. Louis William threatened Bavaria by targeting Augsburg, close to the Bavarian capital of Munich, forcing the French to act. They defeated imperial forces at Hochstadt in September in a bloody battle, but failed to retake Augsburg. The relationship between Villars and Max Emanuel then reached a breaking point, and Ferdinand, the Count of Marsin, replaced Villars. Max Emanuel finally captured Augsburg in December. During the fighting in 1702 and 1703, two major revolts broke out on both sides. In France, Protestants in the Savoie region rebelled against Louis XIV. This revolt, called the Camisards Revolt, began because Louis XIV had revoked the Edict of Nantes in 1685. This forced Protestants, called Huguenots in France, to convert to Catholicism or face persecution. High taxes also added to their anger. On July 23, 1702, a Protestant mob killed a Catholic clergyman, Abbé Chaya, after he imprisoned and tortured several Protestants. This sparked a violent 2-year rebellion. Both sides committed massacres, and fear spread across the region. Foreign powers like England and the Dutch promised help, but little arrived. By 1703, Louis XIV sent the Marquis of Montrevel to crush the revolt. His brutal tactics weakened the rebellion, but the region remained scarred. The second revolt happened in Hungary, then part of Austria. After the Ottoman Empire lost control of Hungary to Austria in 1697, Austria imposed heavy taxes, settled German colonists, and gave away land once rightfully owned by Hungarians. Hungarian nobles resisted losing their privileges, while peasants suffered. This growing resentment exploded into a widespread revolt in 1703. Francis Rákóczi, a wealthy Hungarian noble with anti-Habsburg ancestry, took control of the rebellion and aimed to use it to achieve Hungarian independence, finding an ally in France. The revolt stretched Austria's forces thin, creating an opportunity for France and its allies to strike a decisive blow against Austria from opposite sides in the coming year. Part 3. The Rise of Marlborough. Marlborough saw the French and Bavarian plan unfold and decided to stop it as part of his 1704 campaign. In spring, he got Queen Anne and the Dutch States General to support a campaign to help Leopold in the Moselle River Valley. The Dutch worried about him leaving Holland unprotected, but Marlborough reassured them that the French could not ignore such an attack. In May, Marlborough led 19,000 soldiers south, picking up reinforcements along the way. He moved quickly, keeping his real plan, to march to the Danube and defeat their Franco-Bavarians, a secret. By June, his army crossed the Rhine toward the Danube. French forces, led by Marshals Villeroy and Tallard, moved painfully slow and could not catch him. Marlborough joined Prince Eugene and Louis William, giving the Allied army 60,000 troops. They planned to trap Marsin and Max Emanuel. The fortified town of Donauwörth, defended by French and Bavarian troops, was key to crossing the Danube. On July 2nd, Marlborough launched an attack on the nearby Schellenberg hill. From the Franco-Bavarian perspective, the enemy's battery opened fire upon us and raked us through and through. So accurate was the fire that each discharge of the cannon stretched some of my men on the ground. After 3 assaults, the Bavarians retreated in chaos. Many were killed, captured, or drowned when a bridge collapsed under their weight. The Allies lost 5,000 men, including 1,200 Britons, and Louis William was injured in his foot. Despite criticism over the bloodshed back home, Marlborough's victory opened Bavaria to the Allies. Nothing can now prevent the Emperor from making himself master of Munich, lamented Louis XIV. Marlborough and his allies crossed the Danube into Bavaria, and negotiations failed to convince Max Emanuel to switch sides. Despite his wife urging peace, Bavaria stayed loyal to France. Marlborough responded by sending cavalry to raid and destroy the Bavarian countryside, but Max Emanuel did not yield. On August 6th, Tallard arrived with reinforcements, boosting the Franco-Bavarian army, which still planned to march on Vienna. As autumn neared, Marlborough needed to unite his forces with Prince Eugene's. Eugene shadowed Tallard's march through the Black Forest. When Tallard joined the Bavarians, Eugene camped with 18,000 troops near Hochstadt. On August 10th, the Franco-Bavarian army marched to attack Eugene before he could unite with Marlborough. Marlborough marched swiftly and joined Eugene on August 11th. On the 13th, Marlborough and Eugene, with a total of 56,000 troops, surprised the Franco-Bavarian forces camped behind the Nebel River. Marlborough's plan was to distract the French by attacking the villages of Blenheim and Oudenarde, spreading their forces thin. The French underestimated this plan and placed too many troops in Blenheim, leaving the center weak just as the Duke expected. Marlborough and Eugene attacked the vulnerable center, overwhelming the French by evening. The Allied victory was devastating for the French and Bavarians. Chalford was captured, and 34,000 troops in total were killed, wounded, or taken prisoner. Bavaria surrendered to the Grand Alliance with the Treaty of Inbreeding, and the French retreated, losing more ground. The battle ended French hopes for a decisive victory that year, weakened their alliance with Francis Verkozy, and started turning the war in favor of the Allies. The year 1705 was largely disappointing for the Grand Alliance. Emperor Leopold died in May, delaying Allied plans as his son, Joseph, took the throne. Joseph supported Marlborough and Eugene, bringing some stability despite the disruption. France, recovering from Blenheim, focused on defense. Louis XIV made unpopular moves like raising taxes and forcing conscription to strengthen his armies. Marshal Villeroy commanded 60,000 men in the Spanish Netherlands. Villars held the Moselle with 50,000, and Marsin had 30,000 in Alsace. These three were told to coordinate, but slow communication of the time and reliance on static defenses left openings for the Allies to exploit. Marlborough aimed to invade France through the Moselle Valley in spring, but faced delays and supply issues. When Villars fortified his position, Marlborough abandoned the plan. Meanwhile, Villeroy seized Huy, threatening the Dutch. Marlborough shifted north to counter him, lifting the siege but losing momentum. By year's end, France held its ground, and the Allies made little progress. In 1706, Louis XIV ordered Villeroy to recapture Zaltao. Marlborough, delayed again by pay and logistical disputes among his Danish and Prussian troops, finally faced Villeroy at Ramillies on May 23rd. After hours of cannon fire, Marlborough's mobile forces struck Villeroy's overstretched flanks, broke through the center, and forced a chaotic retreat. The Allies lost 3,700 men, while France suffered 13,000 casualties. This success allowed Marlborough to capture several towns in quick succession, including Brussels, Ghent, and Antwerp. By the end of the campaign season, Marlborough had taken most of the Spanish Netherlands west of the Meuse River. The years 1704 to 1706 were also eventful in Italy. Marshal Vendôme captured key towns like Verrua, Vercelli, and Ivrea in 1704. Victor Amadeus, unable to be reinforced, avoided open battle and stayed protected behind the walls of his capital, Turin. In 1705, Vendôme's army attacked Chivasso near Turin in June, and in August, Vendôme defeated Eugene near Cassano, but failed to chase him down. That winter, another French army captured Nice after a months-long siege. In 1706, the French, under the Count of La Feuillade, besieged the Savoyard capital starting in June, but struggled despite advice from France's top siege engineer Vauban. Victor Amadeus managed to escape Turin, and Eugene gathered forces to strike back. Vendôme was recalled to France in July, leaving Philippe II, the Duke of Orleans, and Marsin in command. On September 7th, Eugene and Victor Amadeus attacked, defeating the French despite being outnumbered. The French suffered heavy losses, including the death of Marsin, and retreated. After the French loss at Turin, the Allies quickly recaptured key towns like Novara, Pavia, and Alessandria. The Convention of Milan in March 1707 saw France give up northern Italy to the Allies, in exchange for the safe return of their men. This effectively ended the war in the region. Meanwhile, Archduke Charles landed in Lisbon in 1704, claiming the Spanish throne as King Charles III. To counter this, James Fitzjames, the Duke of Berwick, a skilled but relatively new commander, led French and Spanish forces to support Philip V. By May, he advanced into Portugal. However, supply shortages, rough terrain, and guerrilla attacks halted progress, forcing a retreat by July. Both sides paused during the summer heat to regroup. At the same time, Admiral Rooke's Anglo-Dutch fleet aimed to rally Catalonia against Philip. After failing to spark a rebellion near Barcelona, Rooke turned to Gibraltar, a poorly defended harbour at the southern tip of Spain. On July 30th, 1,800 Marines attacked, capturing it by August 4th. This victory gave the Allies a key strategic position, though the French fleet tried to reclaim it. On August 24th, a major naval battle near Malaga ended in a draw, with both sides retreating. In October, French and Spanish forces laid siege. Despite severe bombardments, the garrison held firm. By early 1705, bad weather, disease, and heavy losses weakened the attackers. Marshal René de Furlay, the Count of Tassay, replaced Berwick and abandoned the siege in April. The failed attempt cost the Franco-Spanish forces dearly, with 12,000 of their 18,000 troops lost. Gibraltar's capture secured control of the vital Strait of Gibraltar, the only gateway to the Mediterranean, boosting Allied trade and military movements in the process. It also weakened Philip V's position, strengthening Charles's claim to the throne. In Catalonia, tensions grew as locals opposed Philip's centralized rule, fearing that it would erode their rights and autonomy. The Catalans rebelled and sided with the Allies, who landed troops and successfully captured Barcelona by October 1705. This major victory secured Allied influence in the region and sparked further rebellions in Valencia towards the south. In early 1706, Philip tried to retake Barcelona with 24,000 troops and a French fleet, but the presence of a strong Anglo-Dutch fleet scared him off. Archduke Charles then advanced from Portugal. Philip fled Madrid as the Allies briefly occupied the Spanish capital in June, with Archduke Charles being greeted with a cold reception. Spanish loyalty to Philip and the Allies' weak supply lines made it hard to hold the city. By autumn, the Allies retreated to Valencia, where Archduke Charles set up his new base of operations. Berwick, now reinforced, recaptured territories in Castile and Murcia. Philip returned to Madrid in October, stabilizing his status as the King of Spain by year's end. Part 4: Stalemates and Setbacks. In April, the Allied General Henri de Massue, the Earl of Galway, led 15,000 troops to face Berwick's larger army of 25,000 near Uccle and Almanza. The battle at Almanza on April 25th began well for the Allies, but they were outnumbered. When the Portuguese cavalry fled, the infantry was overwhelmed. Galway and his commanders were injured, and 2,000 soldiers surrendered the next day. The remaining army retreated to Catalonia, unable to defend Valencia. Berwick moved carefully and captured Valencia in May. Towns like Chativa were punished severely, with much of it burned for resisting. By late 1707, the Allies had lost control in Spain. Their scattered forces, weakened and divided, held only a few positions in Catalonia and along the coast. Without reinforcements, they were unable to challenge Bourbon power in the peninsula. After losing at Almanza, Austria faced serious challenges. On May 21st, Count Philip Ludwig Zinzendorf, Austria's court chancellor, wrote to Marlborough. He explained that, while Spain's situation was grim, Barcelona could hold with naval support, keeping Archduke Charles safe there until reinforcements arrived. However, Austria struggled to send more troops because they were already fighting in Hungary and southern Italy. Zinzendorf said that new troops would need funding from Britain and the Dutch Republic, since Austria could not afford them. The fighting in southern Italy that Zinzendorf mentioned saw a small Austrian force of 10,000, led by the Count of Daun, capture Naples for Archduke Charles with little resistance that summer. Meanwhile, Austria and Savoy planned to capture Toulon, France's main naval port in the Mediterranean. Prince Eugene and Victor Amadeus led 35,000 troops, supported by a British fleet. From Turin, they crossed rivers and mountains, reaching Toulon in late July. Despite capturing a nearby fort, the Allies hesitated to attack the city due to strong French defenses. On August 14th, the French recaptured the fort, forcing the Allies to evacuate by sea. Although the campaign failed, the French destroyed much of their Mediterranean fleet to avoid its capture. This weakened France's naval power, and the whole affair forced Berwick to divert troops from Spain, reducing his ability to exploit his early victory at Almanza. (1707) in the Low Countries was a frustrating and uneventful year for Marlborough. The Dutch stopped him from leaving the Spanish Netherlands in order to defend against Vendôme's larger army of 100,000. Vendôme, under orders from Louis XIV, avoided battle to prevent another loss like at Ramillies. Thus, no major battles or sieges occurred in the Low Countries that year. In 1708, Vendôme decided to make his move. On July 4th, his troops pretended to retreat, tricking Ghent's garrison into letting French defectors inside. They seized Ghent on July 5th without a fight, and Bruges surrendered soon after. Marlborough blamed Dutch mistreatment of locals for these losses, which he believed caused them to become more sympathetic to the French. He responded with a daring 50-mile march in 60 hours to catch the French, clashing at Oudenarde on July 11th. The chaotic battle saw Marlborough's quick march catch the French unprepared. Poor coordination left Vendôme's troops trapped in the afternoon, but they escaped in the rainy late evening. The French lost 15,000 men, the Allies 3,000. After Oudenarde, Marlborough wanted to march into France, but was overruled by his Dutch generals. Instead, they laid siege to Lille, a formidable French fortress nearby. Starting in August, progress was slow against Lille's strong defenses. Marlborough managed supply lines, while Prince Eugene led the siege. By October, the Allies breached Lille's walls. To try to draw away the Allies, Max Manuel launched an unsuccessful attack on Brussels in November. The remaining French garrison held out in Lille's citadel until December. This delay gave France precious time to regroup, especially as Ricosi was defeated at the Battle of Trenchen in August, freeing up imperial troops to be used against France. On January 5th, 1709, a brutal cold swept across northwestern Europe. The frost lasted 17 days, followed by a torrent of snow and icy winds until mid-March. In France, crops, animals, and vineyards died, even in warmer regions like Provence. Soldiers died where they stood. France was in a crisis. The treasury was nearly empty, the army was underfunded, and the Great Frost, as well as war, destroyed farmland. People were starving and heavily taxed. In Spain, poor harvests and spring floods pushed King Philip V to open his ports to anyone who could bring in food, friend or foe. French soldiers stationed in Catalonia stole from locals to feed themselves, increasing tensions. The Allies saw France's struggles and demanded harsh peace terms. They wanted Philip V to give up his Spanish lands to Archduke Charles, and have Louis XIV abandon key fortresses in the Low Countries. They even insisted that Louis should use his troops to remove his grandson from power if he did not give up his throne. Louis refused, ending the talks. In Britain, calls for no peace without Spain grew louder, with many demanding Archduke Charles take the throne of an undivided Spanish empire. Louis appealed to the French people, framing the demands as an insult to French honor. Some nobles donated gold and silver for the war effort, but support from the general public was weak. Meanwhile, Philip's position in Spain improved after the capture of Alicante, where 700 Britons fiercely resisted, but were ultimately overran by a horde of 14,000 Frenchmen. In the spring, as the Great Frost eased, Marshal Villars faced a food crisis for his troops in the Low Countries. His soldiers, weak and starving, began to mutiny in towns like Arras, Mons, and Cambrai. Villars went to Versailles to plead for help from Louis XIV, but little changed. Taking matters into his own hands, he sent cavalry to gather food and seize supplies. In June, a new war minister was appointed, but the lack of adequate supplies continued. Meanwhile, as peace talks failed, the Allies prepared to pressure France. In June, Marlborough and Eugene led 100,000 troops to besiege Tournai, right next to Lille. Despite fierce resistance, the town fell in July, and its citadel surrendered in September. Marlborough then looked southeast to Mons, and Louis XIV ordered Villars to defend Mons at all costs. The stage for the bloody Battle of Malplaquet on September 11th was set. That day, the Allies attacked Villars' strong defences, hoping to weaken the French flanks before striking the centre. Fighting in the woods of both flanks was brutal. In one instance, the Dutch lost 5,000 men in just 30 minutes trying to attack some trenches. Villars was seriously wounded in his knee during the battle, leaving Marshal Boufflers in command. After the ferocious contest, the Allies broke through, forcing the French to retreat. Though the French lost, they withdrew in good order, saving most of their cannons. The battle was devastating, with 21,000 Allied and 13,000 French casualties, making Malplaquet one of the bloodiest battles of the entire 18th century. Mons fell in October, but the Allies were too weakened to advance further into France. Part 5. Exhaustion and Negotiation. Another round of peace talks resumed in Gertruydenberg in 1710. The Allies again demanded that Philip V step down from the Spanish throne. And again, they demanded that if he refused, Louis XIV should declare war on his own grandson. Louis declined, but offered money to help the Allies remove Philip instead. The Allies rejected this, and so the war went on. Knowing that French support for Philip was beginning to fade, given that his grandfather just offered them money to depose Philip, the Allies, now at this point of the war almost entirely bankrolled by British cash, advanced into Aragon. Philip's army faced defeat twice in 1710, first at Almonar in July, and then at Zaragoza in August. These victories allowed the Allies to reach Madrid, which Archduke Charles entered for a second time on September 28th. And for a second time, Madrid's citizens stayed unfriendly towards him. Louis XIV sent Vendôme with reinforcements to Spain. By October, Vendôme crossed the Tagus River and forced Britain's James Stanhope to retreat, blocking Stanhope from joining up with the Portuguese army. The Austrian Count of Staremberg chose to fall back to Barcelona instead of staying in hostile Castile. Philip re-entered Madrid on December 3rd to cheering crowds, and joined Vendôme in pursuing the Allies. On December 9th, Vendôme's troops stormed Brihuega, forcing Stanhope's depleted forces to surrender. The next day, Vendôme fought Staremberg at Villaviciosa. The battle ended in a bloody stalemate, leaving both sides battered. Philip's hold on Madrid grew stronger, and the Habsburg effort in Spain collapsed, except in Catalonia. Meanwhile, Great Britain and France kept negotiating peace. A new government was elected in Britain, led by the anti-war Tories, who wanted to end the long, costly conflict. The Dutch Republic, exhausted by the war, also pushed for peace. To keep the Dutch fighting a bit longer so negotiations could continue smoothly, Britain promised them trade benefits and permanent control of several towns and fortresses in the Spanish Netherlands. However, Britain secured its own interests by holding onto Gibraltar and Ostend. In 1709, the Dutch signed the Barrier Treaty, committing the drained Republic to more years of war. In Flanders, the Allies made little progress. After the heavy losses at Malplaquet, Villars avoided battle and used strong defenses to wear down the enemy. Marlborough and Eugene captured fortresses like Douai, Béthune, and Aire-sur-la-Lys, but lost over 19,000 men in the process, far more than the French, who lost 6,000. By autumn, the Allies gained some territory, but the human and financial toll was enormous, weakening their unity and resolve. Britain and France continued to work on a treaty. In 1711, a new draft would allow Philip to stay King of Spain, while Austria would keep Spain's territories in Italy and the Low Countries. Britain would control the lucrative Hacienda de Negros, giving them permission to sell enslaved people taken from Africa to the Spanish colonies in the Americas. The Dutch would also get back their barrier towns. When this draft became public, Austria and the Dutch were furious as they were not consulted, accusing Britain of betrayal. The war's focus shifted when Emperor Joseph died from smallpox in April. His brother, Archduke Charles, was likely to become the new emperor. If Charles ruled both Austria and Spain, it would upset Europe's balance of power, much like uniting France and Spain. In October, Charles became Emperor Charles VI, diminishing the Allied cause. In northern France, Marlborough launched a successful campaign, capturing Bouchain in September. However, Britain's anti-war Tory government and Queen Anne, after a falling out with the Duke's wife, grew hostile to Marlborough. In December, Queen Anne dismissed him and replaced him with James Butler, the Duke of Ormond, who was secretly ordered to avoid battles with the French as peace talks continued. With Marlborough now out of the picture, Prince Eugene led the Allied army in 1712. They crossed the Selle River to attack La Quesnoy, joined by British troops under Ormond. However, Ormond followed his orders and gave little support. On June 30th, La Quesnoy surrendered, and the British withdrew to Ghent and Bruges. Eugene, leading the Dutch and Austrians, continued fighting, hoping to force the French into a battle. He attacked Landrecy, but left his supply lines exposed. On July 24th, Villars pounced, capturing the fortified camp at the Nain. Eugene tried to retake it, but failed. 5,000 Allied soldiers were killed or captured in the frenzy, while British troops nearby did nothing. Villars' victory lifted French morale and strengthened the kingdom's position in peace talks. Eugene had to retreat, and by October, the French regained much of the ground they had been losing in the Low Countries since 1706. Their victory at the Nain demonstrated to the Allies that France still had its teeth. Without crucial British funds or troops, the Allies could no longer continue the war. Part 6. Utrecht, Rastatt, Baden. The peace conference to end the War of the Spanish Succession began in Utrecht on January 29, 1712. Representatives from France, Britain, Spain, and the Netherlands gathered to negotiate. Most countries accepted the terms already discussed in 1711, but changes arose. Louis XIV pushed for Max Emmanuel to gain the Spanish Netherlands as compensation for the war, but this did not bear fruit. Britain supported Victor Amadeus, who was given control of Sicily. A major problem emerged when smallpox and measles killed several French heirs between 1711 and 1712, leaving a sickly toddler as the heir to the elderly Sun King, making Philip V very likely to inherit France within the foreseeable future. to prevent a union of the French and Spanish crowns, a possibility the Allies had spent a decade trying to prevent, the Allies demanded that Philip renounce his claim to the French throne before talks could continue. He agreed to do so in November. The Treaty of Utrecht was signed on April 11, 1713. Philip V was confirmed as the King of Spain, and the French and Spanish crowns were to never unite. Louis XIV also dropped his support for, and even expelling from France, James Edward Stuart, confirming Anne as Britain's monarch. Britain gained Gibraltar, Minorca, and key American territories including Newfoundland, Hudson's Bay, and mainland Nova Scotia. Spain also granted Britain the Asiento for 30 years. The smaller members of the Grand Alliance also benefited. Prussia gained land in Guelders and was recognized as a kingdom by France. Portugal secured her borders with Spain in South America. Victor Amadeus became King of Sicily, and France returned Savoy's Alpine lands. The only major power not involved in these peace talks was Austria. Emperor Charles refused to give up his claim to the Spanish throne as King Charles III. He wanted to keep fighting France for a better deal, but lacked the strength to do so alone. Austria's weak position thus shifted the war's focus to battles along the Rhine, closer to home. On June 24, 1713, French forces captured Kaiserslautern. Villars led another attack on Landau, where Prince Eugene tried to defend the Rhine but could not move his troops quickly enough. Landau fell on August 20th after fierce resistance. Villars then invaded Germany, laying siege to Fribourg in October. After a bloody assault on November 2nd, the French forced the defenders into the citadel. Villars threatened to burn the town unless they surrendered. Emperor Charles ordered the garrison to yield, and Fribourg fell on November 21st. As winter arrived, both armies retreated to their camps. There, peace talks began between Prince Eugene and Villars. They had a mutual respect for each other, and they both shared the goal of ending the war, easing negotiations. By March 1714, they signed the Treaty of Rastatt, bringing peace to much of Europe. Signed on March 6th, the Treaty of Rastatt saw a significant exchange of territories. France kept Strasbourg, Landau, and Alsace, but gave up its lands on the right bank of the Rhine. Meanwhile, Max Manuel was given back Bavaria, and his younger brother Joseph Clement was given back Cologne. Austria was given all of Spain's Italian territories, with the exception of Sicily and the Spanish Netherlands, now the Austrian Netherlands. The Dutch were allowed to keep their barrier towns in the region. Emperor Charles was also given permission to style himself as the King of Spain, though both sides knew that any real power that came with that title lay in the hands of Philip V. All of these terms were finalized and agreed upon between France and Austria in Baden, Switzerland, on September 7th. The last episode of the War of the Spanish Succession ended with a brutal conclusion in Catalonia. Since 1705, the Catalans backed Emperor Charles, feeling secure with British support. However, the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713 ended foreign support for their cause. When the Austrian Count of Schellenberg withdrew with the Allied armies that year, he handed Barcelona to the Catalans instead of Philip, angering Madrid. Despite slim odds, the Catalans refused to surrender. By mid-1714, French and Spanish forces, led by the Duke of Berwick, began their campaign to crush Catalonia. Berwick started his siege of Barcelona in July, digging trenches and tightening blockades around the city. After months of heavy fighting, his forces launched a massive assault on September 11th. Brutal hand-to-hand combat followed, with the Catalans losing key to defenses and redoubts. Barcelona surrendered 2 days later. Berwick spared the city from looting and its civilians from harsh punishment, seeking to preserve its wealth for Philip. The Bourbons lost 9,000 soldiers, the Catalan defenders perhaps just as many. Catalonia paid dearly for its defiance. The region lost its autonomy, and its people had their rights stripped away under martial law for years. Majorca, off the eastern coast of Spain, resisted until June 1715, but also fell. Its sister island, Minorca, stayed under British control, as per the treaty. Abandoned by their allies, the Catalans faced severe consequences for supporting Charles, and their cause was ultimately crushed at great cost. By the time Europe laid down its guns, some 1.2 million people were dead or injured as a result of the war. Such devastation undoubtedly changed of many nations, for better or for worse. The Dutch Republic was no exception. The war drained the tiny nation's finances so much that no tax receipts at all had come from 2 of the 7 provinces. To avoid placing heavy taxes on its citizens, the Dutch borrowed heavily to fund the war, but they could not repay these debts. This economic crisis led to de-urbanization, de-industrialization, and the loss of their global influence. Dutch traders turned to British competitors, and the Republic lost its near monopoly on world trade. Spain emerged from the war with Philip V finally confirmed as its king. Though his empire was reduced in size, Spain adored its young monarch and entered a period of relative peace and recovery. Philip, inspired by his home country of France, introduced modern reforms called the Nueva Planta Decrees between 1707 and 1716. These decrees united Spain's many different kingdoms and governments into one centralized state governed from Madrid, bringing the aging empire on par with the modern nation-states of Europe. While Spain never regained its former superpower status, it could enjoy its new one with a sense of stability and comfort. As for the Habsburgs, they lost Spain, and their authority as Holy Roman Emperors weakened as regions like Prussia, Hanover, Saxony, and Bavaria began to seek independence and kingly titles. However, Austria was happy with its new territories in Italy and the Low Countries. These lands brought increased tax revenue, especially from the Austrian Netherlands, allowing Austria to modernize and expand its army and strengthen its position in Europe. For France, the war marked the end of Louis XIV's ambitions. The Sun King admitted on his deathbed that he had loved war too much. He died on September 1st, 1715, leaving behind a financially exhausted France to a 5-year-old King Louis XV. Though the Bourbon dynasty placed a relative on the throne of a foreign power, France found itself beginning to lose its status as a premier global power, though it would not dare do so without a fight. Great Britain emerged as the greatest beneficiary of the war. The Treaty of Utrecht gave Britain new ports across Europe and North America, setting the stage for it to dominate global trade. In 1714, the Elector of Hanover, George, became King of Great Britain after Queen Anne's death in August. Although the new king focused on his German lands, Britain as a kingdom shifted its attention away from Europe and towards building a worldwide trading empire and a powerful navy to protect and enforce it. Over the course of the next 2 centuries, it reduced these two tools to their full potential to become the next global hegemon.